Joining us here on the programme. Pleasure to speak to you as always. We now move over to Europe, where according to the Russian Defence Ministry, Russian forces struck Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Ukrainian officials confirmed damage to a thermal power plant in the Kyiv region, causing blackouts and interrupting gas supplies for over 8,000 homes. Ukraine reported that Russia launched 810 drones and 13 missiles between Saturday and Sunday, targeting energy facilities, military bases and logistical hubs. In Kyiv, drone debris struck residential buildings, including a 9-story apartment block, killing at least 2 people and an infant, while a main government building also sustained damage. Additional strikes caused damage across multiple regions, including Zaporizhzhia, Kyiv, Odessa, Sumy and Chernihiv. Russian attacks on Kyiv's energy infrastructure have been escalated since the 2022 invasion, intensifying as winter approaches. We're now joined by our guest, Andrew Latham. He is a professor of international relations and he joins us live from Minnesota. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us here on NewsX World. Obviously, we saw a huge aerial attack from Moscow yesterday, Andrew, claiming to hit mainly energy infrastructure and military buildings in the Ukrainian capital and in other and various cities and areas of Ukraine. What are your thoughts on Russia's escalating aerial barrage on Ukrainian territory, especially with the backdrop of these diplomatic efforts to end the war?
Well, at one level, it's not surprising at all. Pardon me. It is in the nature of this kind of war that you see a strategic dimension. And by that, I mean that both sides are attacking logistical hubs behind the lines. They are attacking roads and bridges. They are attacking oil infrastructure. And that's meant to undermine the ability of frontline forces to resist the other side. So that's not unusual. That's in the European experience, that's World War II. In the American experience, that's certainly the Korean War and Vietnam and Iraq. And it's the nature of war. Now, that being said, we can put it in a context. Russian strategy vis-a-vis Ukraine has been, as winter approaches, and now this is several winters have approached, to try to freeze Ukraine out of this war by undercutting its ability not only to manufacture goods, which requires energy, but also to heat homes, which requires energy. And so every fall we see this ramping up of the attacks on the energy infrastructure, not surprising. I don't think that President Putin is interested in a ceasefire unless all of his core concerns are addressed. And they're not going to be addressed because they are, I was going to say outrageously, but let's just say exorbitantly extreme. And there's no way in which President Zelensky can concede these. So there's no incentive really on the Russian side for a ceasefire, and certainly not for any kind of permanent peace along the lines that have been suggested by President Trump and accepted by President Zelensky. That's not going to happen. So what's the option? The option is to prosecute the war on the ground ever more fully, and that means prosecuting the war behind the lines ever more fully. And so really none of this is surprising, and none of the diplomatic noises coming out of Washington or Kyiv are going to make any difference at all.
Yes, and Andrew, you mentioned there that these strikes aimed at energy infrastructure and logistical hubs could be aimed at weaponizing the winter months that are approaching. How much of a serious aspect is this? And how much of an effect does this seasonal change could it have on the war in just a few months' time?
Well, literally and metaphorically, the front lines are going to freeze in place, at least, well, during the fall when there's so much mud and muck and it's very difficult to conduct military operations along the front lines. So there's likely to be something of not quite a hiatus, but the dial will be turned down a little bit. But that doesn't apply to the behind-the-lines long-range strikes by either side. In fact, they have an incentive to ramp that up. The Russians, in order to undermine the production and home heating side of things, which undermines morale and the capacity to fight, and makes perfect rational sense. And on the Ukrainian side, it's about embarrassing Russia, but also about, to the extent possible, galvanizing domestic opposition to the war in Russia by making it uncomfortable for Russians as well. So we're likely to see the way in which the war is prosecuted. We've seen this over the last few winters as well. It's likely to change, especially in that autumn season. It's easier to conduct ground operations when the ground is frozen, but between now and then, it's going to become increasingly difficult. Again, I think both sides have incentives to conduct these kind of long-range strikes, which they are. They also have incentives to acquire and deploy anti-missile systems. The Russians seem to be having very little difficulty with that. The open question is to what extent the Ukrainians can continue to acquire and deploy the kind of anti-missile systems that they need in order to frustrate the Russian strategy.
Andrew Latham, thank you very much for that analysis, and thank you for taking the time. Pleasure having you on the programme. We now move over to